Hi, everyone. Welcome. I have no idea what I'm saying. Oh, God, I've done this 8 million times, and I can't remember a single thing I've ever said in the past, but I can do this. Hi, everyone. Welcome. If you're new here, we are talking about chronic illnesses and what it's like to really live with chronic illnesses. This channel was developed after I published a book called The Things We Don't Say, an anthology of chronic illness truths. It's a collection of 50 real stories by different authors from around the world of different ages, races, genders, sexual orientations, and of course, different physical and mental illnesses, and talking about what it's really like to live with them. If you want to know more, please visit chronicillnesstruths.com, which will be linked in the description below. And today I'm going to be speaking with Jane Lesley, who is one of the contributing authors in the book. Jane is coming today from Newcastle upon Tyne in the United Kingdom. Each piece in the book has a small biography from the author. And I'm going to read off Jane's right now. Jane Lesley is a retired social worker living in Newcastle, United Kingdom. She has been living with Crohn's disease for over 40 years, but has moved her home between 3 continents nonetheless. Also, each piece in the book has a small photo, which I don't need to show you because you can see Jane right here. But I can say that in the book, her photo is great, has an adorable picture with her holding her dog George there. Jane also just happens to be my friend outside of the book. We met while I was in the early stages, still gathering pieces to put into it. And we got to talking one day about our common connection with chronic illness. So we just talked about the book a little bit, and she decided to write a piece, but maybe she'll tell you more about that herself. Jane's piece is called We Don't Get Any Medals. She talks about others, it's in the section called Others' Perceptions, and it's the last piece in the book before my story. And it's the last piece very intentionally because I love the message that was there, and I really liked the idea of ending the book with that message, which we will get to in a moment. Jane mentions having a long list of chronic illnesses. She mentions Crohn's disease, degenerative disc disease, disembarkment syndrome, depression, adenomyosis, gallstones, torn ligaments, migraines, asthma, anosmia, malaria, and bilateral pulmonary emboli, to name a few, as she says. She mentions people saying that we should be able to fix chronic illness, and the idea that it's all in your head, which unfortunately I think we're all familiar with, and also brings up ageism and sexism, especially in medical contexts. So I think that her piece touches on a lot of really important topics, and I'm very excited to talk about them. Something that especially struck me was where she said, just once though, I'd like someone to say, you really cope well with adversity, not because I need compliments so much as I would like to feel seen as the courageous woman I've had to be. And that really struck a chord with me. And I think it's something that a lot of us feel. But I can say, as a friend of Jane's who has watched how she does with this, you do cope very well with adversity. And I have been very impressed with how you handle things. So having said all of that, welcome, Jane, and thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Julie. It's really a pleasure.
Well, to get started, I know that I just listed a whole bunch of the chronic illnesses that you mentioned in the book, but I'd love to hear from you. What did you consider to be the chronic illnesses and symptoms that most impact you, or just the ones you feel like mentioning at all?
Well, I would say I think about my particular health issues as somewhat like a quilt. That there are so many interlocking symptoms and conditions that it's almost the only way that I can sort of describe my experience is if all those pieces sort of fall together, and really not easy to sort of look at each one in particular, but more to see how each affects the other. So for example, I have a neurological problem called disembarkment syndrome, which makes me very unsteady and can cause me to fall. And so because of that, I find sometimes that I can get quite a lot of brain fog. And with the brain fog, then I find myself feeling quite upset. And then that makes me feel tense. And then that causes my neck to have a problem. And then I have pain in my hands. And then I have to take medicine for the pain in my hands. And that kicks off. Da 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 da. So it's really sort of a matter of seeing them sort of as an interconnected set of health conditions, and to understand my body as not a list of diagnoses, but to understand my body as a system of interlocking conditions.
I really like that quilt metaphor. I never thought about it that way before. I sometimes might think of what you're describing as a domino effect, but the problem is then you're talking about dominoes falling over and then they're down. But that's not what we're dealing with. We're dealing with different pieces that a domino might fall down, but then it comes back up again and it might connect to more than one domino, and it just doesn't fit. And I think the quilt metaphor works a lot better. And I really like that. I'll have to remember that.
And I think that that's something that it's most helpful if our supporters and our medical team get that. And it's not an easy thing for people to get, particularly when one becomes involved with specialists who are sort of treating one or the other of the conditions. It's really quite important for people to be able to sort of see the holistic quality of that. And often it's my responsibility to try and help people to understand what those connections are. And I think that can be a little bit of a challenge, because I think sometimes it's challenging not to sort of come across as somebody who is putting forth a litany of complaints. So I have this, I have this, I have this, I have this. When really the most important thing is to say, this is how this is contributing to this, and this is how that's contributing to that. And so we need to look at things and understand what the sort of components are. I think that's a challenge with having several different health issues.
I agree. I find the same problem where if I list everything out, especially for a new practitioner, it just sounds like I'm exaggerating or making it up or trying to make too big a deal out of something, when it's just simply life. And I think if you haven't lived with it, it can be really hard to understand, especially how one can feed into another. I think that can be very hard to explain, but it sounds like you have found ways to at least express yourself, and hopefully you'll be heard. So what made you want to be involved in this book?
Well, I just felt so proud of the commitment that you were making. And it felt very much consistent with my kind of ethos as a social worker, that the way that we provide mutual aid to each other is by hearing each other's stories and having a space to be heard. And often the sense of being heard is easier when we know that we're speaking to somebody who has maybe the same lived experience, not an identical lived experience, but a similar lived experience. And I kind of put it in the same way as with an old friend, you don't have to tell them the backstory to everything. When you're talking to somebody else who has a chronic illness, there are some things that don't need to be said. but those things that don't need to be said perhaps to each other do need to be said to other people, or to people who have been somewhat isolated in their own experience. And it becomes very it can be quite life-changing to read other people's stories and know that we do have somewhat of a universal experience, even though our particular stories are different. So when I thought about the possibility of having a book or an anthology that crossed a lot of different health conditions and a lot of different experiences, a lot of different cultural, ethnic, life experiences for people, I just felt a real commitment to want to be part of that. And I just thought it was just such an important thing. And I've been amazed at the way that this has come into being, and very inspired that somebody who has, you know, many challenges that you have, that we can read about in the book, has been able to do something so meaningful. And so I was just sort of 100% behind it in any way I could be.
Yeah, I really like what you were saying about the backstory. It's so true. When you're talking to someone you've known forever, you can skip that backstory. And when I'm in a room full of people with chronic illnesses, I feel like I don't have to step back and explain the minutia. But that's now after I've had chronic illnesses for so many years and spoken to so many people. And earlier on, all I wanted was to find somebody else. I think it would have been very helpful to talk to someone and find out it wasn't just me. And so I'm hearing from a lot of people who are saying they do appreciate that part where they're realizing they're not alone. And so I think it's great that there's that mix of pieces that tell the backstory and ones that just assume the backstory. And so I'm curious why you chose to write about what you did.
I think that, again, my sort of social work background has made looking at things from a strengths perspective to be very, very important. And by that, I don't mean to deny the challenge of our lives, and to sort of say, you know, we're heroic in some way. And I particularly find it quite a challenge to read. In particular, thinking of the struggle I've had with depression, and sort of to read stories from people who've been through depression and or any illness actually, and sort of come out the other side as a kind of a warrior, an example to us all. You know, this is how I did it. It's wonderful to read those stories, but the reality is that for most of us, chronic illness is a daily grind, in which there are every now and then there are furloughs. We don't know how long they're going to last, and that's a challenge. But I felt that it was important to say that surviving those challenges really needs to be celebrated. And I always thought of I can just remember many, many years ago, when I was working with people who had been involved in domestic violence issues when I was in practice. And I remember one of the people saying to me, it was at the time of the hostages who were coming home, and people were tying yellow ribbons around the trees. And this woman said, nobody ever tied a yellow ribbon around a tree for me. And I've been living through a war zone just the same. And I thought about how many of us get up every day and sort of march our way through those challenges and manage to survive, and that it's important that we have a sense of being valued for our for the courage it takes to do that. And many times when I use the word courage, I hear people say, but I'm not courageous, I'm not brave, because somehow that needs to mean that it's done with a sort of heroic stance. That sometimes just getting through every day is a victory. And it's very helpful if we have people in our lives who say and who validate and affirm us for that victory.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it is so important just to be seen, like that woman was saying. I feel that that comes up a lot, and especially right now, I think during this pandemic where so many people are sadly going to be diagnosed with autoimmune diseases from long COVID, and the resources that are being set up for them are maybe not quite the resources that those of us who've had chronic illnesses all these years have received, even though we've needed them just as much. And we're not seen in the same way. And I think that this is a conversation that's going to be coming up more and more in that context, probably.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be really important not to be resentful of the fact that, you know, we've waited somehow for some systemic validation of what we need and what our experience is. And hearing it now coming because of the pandemic, when many of us have been living in isolation for various reasons to do with our illness, it's going to be really important for us to see this as a blessing. Rather than kind of thinking, well, why didn't this happen before? Why have we not had that kind of attention paid to our needs? And I personally feel very grateful that things that I have really found very life-giving. For example, I joined a choir a few years ago, and it did wonders for me. But it caused me a lot of pain, caused me a lot of neck pain, and so sometimes I found it quite difficult to turn up for rehearsals. Whereas now there are choirs all over on the virtual choirs, and people like me are coming out of the woodwork and saying, finally we can sing. So I'm hoping that we will be able to sort of benefit from this increased awareness that people are having.
That's my hope also. I'm really hoping that as more people go back out into the world, once things with the pandemic ease up, I'm hoping that a lot of organizations have recognized how useful it is to have these online components. And already I'm seeing that some are saying that. Some aren't, but some are very specifically saying, okay, we're seeing how important this is. We don't know how, but we're going to find a way to incorporate it going forward. So I think that while it may be frustrating that we didn't get all of this, all of these years that we needed it, and now boom, it's just happening, I think the key is going to be to say, okay, now there's this awareness. People with chronic illnesses are being seen in a new way. How do we tie in the new resources that are being made available for people who survived COVID-19? How do we make those available for those of us with chronic illnesses that we've had for many, many years or from other causes? So I don't know how that's going to work, but that's what I'm hoping for. So I'm going to just pause for 1 second and say, if you are enjoying this, if you want to see more videos, please like this video and subscribe down below. Moving on. You had said in your piece, usually I'm a pretty good patient with a good sense of humor. I tend to underreport rather than overreport my health challenges. I am proactive. I have developed a good team of doctors who get me. And that really struck me because I think that says so clearly what it is that the medical community considers to be a good patient. It's everything you just listed. And I so strongly disagree. I mean, I agree with you that that is what's considered to be a good patient. I just don't think it's what should be considered a good patient. I don't think you should have to go in with a sense of humor. I don't think you should have to underreport your health challenges. I think being proactive is great, but not everyone has that ability. And I think that it shouldn't be necessary. And I know for me personally, I wouldn't have received my diagnoses and treatments if I hadn't been the one doing the research and going to my doctors and requesting specific tests. And that is a level of proactivity that not everybody can manage. And there have been times in my life that I couldn't. So I think that there's some problems in our system, and I find it interesting that you brought it up in that way. And I would love to just get your thoughts on that.
Well, it's interesting to me that that you spoke about the issue of being an underreporter, and what I've found is that I do underreport. I'm able to deal with a lot of discomfort, a lot of pain, and a lot of stress. And so it's become important to me to say to doctors, I underreport, so that they have a sense that what they're hearing is probably not a very accurate report. And I actually have a psychiatrist who helps me with my depression, and she actually has written a letter, because sometimes it's better. One doctor will listen to another doctor much more easily until they get to know you, at least. And she said in this letter, Jane underreports her symptoms. And this has been like a passport for me, because I haven't had to go through with new doctors the whole process of them sort of trying to get a sense of who this patient is, and to sort of have the sense of, okay, so I'm listening to this, but possibly what I'm hearing is, you know, should be sort of upped a notch or two. And that sort of passport, and I think doctors do that for each other, you know, when we get referrals, that passport has been invaluable to me. But it only happened when I asked my psychiatrist to say, please, will you tell these other, well, actually, I'll tell you how it came about. It came about because when I developed this neurological syndrome, disembarkment syndrome, it's very, very rare. I think it's an ultra rare disease. It sort of qualifies. It doesn't even come up in the ICD-9. And because I had a history of depression, it was diagnosed as a psychological problem. And my psychiatrist and my therapist both said, Jane, you are not a person who somatizes. There's a problem. And eventually I did find somebody who knew what it was and diagnosed it. But I became very concerned about the fact, and I think worried that other issues I would have might be misinterpreted. And I felt as if I sort of needed a reference, and getting that reference from another doctor to say, you know, don't go down the road of thinking that she's somatizing. Don't bother to go down that. We've checked that out. That was very, very liberating. And as far as having a sense of humor is concerned, however, I wonder if that's a little cultural. I think that may be sort of cultural. I think English people tend to sort of have a bit of a laugh. We tend to have a bit of a laugh at ourselves. So I'm not sure that that's, yeah, I think
I
that's
get
a cultural issue.
I get what you're saying. I think getting that note from your doctor was brilliant. I can definitely see the use in that one. As for the sense of humor, I think the equivalent to me is just being personable and getting along with the doctors, making them like me as a person. And I have that privilege. And I know that that's a lot harder for a lot of people. And there have definitely been days where if I didn't already have that rapport with the doctor, there are days I'm going in, I am not going to be a happy, personable person. My default is to generally be happy and personable. And I am talkative. I know how to express myself. I'm well educated. I come across as such. I am a non-threatening small white woman. And not everybody is going to present in the same way and have that same kind of access. So while I understand that we're all people and it's hard to shut off that desire to just communicate and talk to somebody, I feel that it shouldn't be a necessity for getting reasonable care. But I do understand why you feel that it's part of your arsenal, just like I feel that it's my being personable as part of mine. It's a very tricky situation, I think.
It is, and I think it speaks volumes to the fact that many of us, especially when we're in need of a diagnosis, many of us feel very grateful if we go into a doctor's office and feel heard and seen. And I think getting over that and beginning to expect that as a baseline is really hard. As somebody once said, somebody just recently said to me, if it's hard to be, it's hard to do. If it's hard to get into that doctor's office because you feel so lousy, to then expect oneself to call up, the kind of emotional strength to take somebody on, especially somebody from a culture that's, steeped in needing to have an authority and an opinion, that takes a lot. Interestingly, I found that I'm able to be very helpful to other people. And as you have for me, Julie, when you've come to doctor's appointments with me, I had an experience recently with my sister, who is a doctor, and who had a very difficult diagnosis of some very strange symptoms. And we went to see another physician who was just dreadful. And I stood up and said, I will not leave this office until I've seen you pick up her file and read it. I'm not going anywhere. And this man just looked absolutely flummoxed, but read it. And clearly, I don't think he just saw somebody coming at him just with this incredible, sense of I was really quite angry. I could do that for my sister. It's hard to do it for yourself, but I will say that was an occasion where I really got to see that sexism trumps everything. Because, I mean, she's a very well-regarded physician. She's known at that hospital, but all of a sudden, as there's a woman with a complaint that seems odd, took a long time to diagnose, and I watched her enter the sort of diagnostic mill and get beaten up just the same as many of us do. But eventually she did get a diagnosis, and as we do, but it can take years for some people. And I think when I think about my own the issues that I've had, I've found that there's been such a relief in, and finally somebody saying, this is what's wrong with you. And I was reading an article the other day where they're sort of wanting to talk about chronic undiagnosed condition, to give people some name, that rather than saying they don't know what's wrong with me, we can say I have a chronic undiagnosed condition. And I certainly would have found that quite a helpful, would have been quite helpful for me when I was talking to other people.
I have something similar to that. Well, first, I just want to go back for 1 second and say I love how you stood up for your sister like that. I've gone with many people to their appointments and had others come with me to mine, and it definitely makes a difference. And I highly recommend it for anyone who is able to make that happen. Also, for anyone who's read the book and is curious about the fact that I went with Jane to her appointment, and has picked up on the fact that I'm in Massachusetts and Jane is in the United Kingdom. She used to live she used to live in Massachusetts, and I used to live in a different town in Massachusetts, and that is when we first met. So going to the appointment was much easier then, what with us being near each other. But I will say the first diagnosis I received that was anything close to accurate was undifferentiated connective tissue disease, which basically means you have a connective tissue disease, but we don't know what you have. And even though every time I used that term, I had to explain to people that it meant no one knew what was wrong with me, it was still so validating. It took me 11 years just to get that far. And to finally have somebody say, we narrowed it down, it's autoimmune and it's connective tissue, it gave me some frame of reference for what was going on with my body. And it was a way for me to tell people, look, I have a thing. And even though we don't know what it is, we know it's a thing. And that was so important. I actually hadn't heard what you were saying before about this new category. I hadn't heard that. So I'm really glad, and I'm going to go online and look that up and learn more, because I think that's a really good idea and something that is much needed for people who go for all of these years without a diagnosis. Thank you for mentioning that. Okay, so we've been going for a while now. I'd like to wrap it up soon. I want to mention something that you wrote at the end of your piece, just because I think it's so beautiful. It's one reason yours was put at the end of the book to tie things up, and I think it's very worth mentioning here. Okay, so you wrote, I suspect that here in this anthology, there will be many courageous men and women who are the unsung heroes, the ones who get up every day and fight a battle with pain and illness and who don't get any medals for it. And I just love that. I think that it's so easy to write about ourselves, and there's nothing wrong with that. And it actually has a lot of value, but you took that moment to recognize everybody else. And I really appreciate that. So thank you for that. What else would you like people to know about you?
What else? Well, I think that there's a strength that comes from exercising emotional muscle. And that's both a blessing and a curse. The blessing is that through adversity, we can become more resilient. The curse is that when one is coping under extreme challenges, that the coping is invisible. And I think we all need to feel that we're seen. I think it's just vital for human beings to feel seen and understood. And I would say that I remember back in the 80s when a book came out in Boston. It was called Our Bodies, Ourselves, and it was the first book ever really to talk about women's health from the point of view of women themselves. And I found that to be very affirming. And I think that the anthology that you've produced is very similar. It helps people to have a voice and to be seen. And ultimately, that's really what we all need. We all need a good listening to. We need to be seen. And we need to feel that somebody is committed to. There's my dog.
Hi, George.
You want to meet my dog? Would that be good? Let me just go
I
grab
think that would be lovely.
Come here. Come here, darling. Yeah. Come on, sweetie. Come and say hi to Julie and everybody before we say goodbye.
Aww.
Oh. So this is George, and he's in the picture in the book. Say hello.
And you're holding him just like that in the picture.
Do you want to be seen and heard? What do you think?
He definitely wants to be seen and heard. I
have
can't believe, by the way, I know it was just an example, but I can't believe you used our bodies, ourselves as an example in any way referencing my book. That's a whole other level. But I do very much appreciate what you're saying. And it's the reason that I started this, is because I felt that there was nothing quite like it, and it needed to be out there. Hi, George. So I think that's an excellent point to end this interview on. So I'm going to say goodbye to everybody, and thank you all for being here, and especially thank you, Jane, for being here, and thank you, George, for visiting. And if you enjoyed this video, please do remember to hit like. It definitely helps out, and please subscribe as well, and hit that notification bell so you'll be notified as soon as new videos appear. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day. So how do you think that went?
That was great. But you know what? I realized that I should have probably said, you caught me on a good day.
Yeah, I get that. I get a lot of people saying how I seem to be doing so well all the time, and I have to explain that's because I only hit record when I'm doing well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think it's important that people kind of realize that we all have days when we put our lippy on and we put our, and then there are other days, if you've been recording, I'd be like, oh. So you got me on a good day.
Oh yeah. This is the most dressed up I've been in months. Absolutely.
And it's okay. It's okay not to be on a good day and to still get to be interviewed and say how we're feeling.
That is also true. I'll work on that too. Okay, talk to you later.
Bye, Julie.
Bye.